And so we're going to move on into our newsmaker.
Sure.
Today, the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, is in Philadelphia at the MLK Drive Bridge, touring the construction progress. And let's face it, there are hundreds of bridges in Pennsylvania in disrepair.
We caught up with the secretary this morning to talk exclusively about mascots. I'm sorry, no. We talked about bridges, Biden, Boeing, and a lot more. Take a listen.
Secretary, you were here in Philadelphia at the MLK Bridge 2 years ago to announce billions of dollars in funding for bridges, $1.6 billion for Pennsylvania, and now you're back. We have more than 500 bridges in our region that are in poor condition. What are you seeing by way of progress in getting these bridges repaired?
Well, we're in a moment now where the money is moving and the construction is increasingly underway, and that's part of why I've been looking forward to returning to the MLK Bridge after being there 2 years ago, as we were just in the earliest stages of standing up programs like the Bridge Formula program that were created by the Biden infrastructure package. We now have about 45,000 projects around the country that have been identified for funds through this package. Some of them can be done in one construction season. Some of them are the work of a decade. But what they all have in common is getting these projects done is going to make everyday life easier in communities around the country, including in Philadelphia.
I would love to get your thoughts, while we have you, on public transit. You know, here in Philadelphia, our regional transit system, in terms of ridership, is operating at roughly 2/3 capacity to what it was pre-pandemic. I would love for you to speak on what are the challenges facing American public transit systems in the next 10 years and how we're going to solve those challenges.
Well, you know, public transit is vitally important for so many Americans. It's something that is helping with affordability issues, opens up new neighborhoods as a housing option. It's even part of our climate solution, but only if that transit system is operating well, is effective, is convenient, has enough frequency to take care of riders' needs. And that's where we think investment is critically important. So another feature of the Biden infrastructure plan is it's got the most federal money going to help transit systems at any time in federal history. And that's certainly the case for SEPTA, where, just to take one example, out of our rail car modernization program, we're purchasing new rail cars that are going to help add frequency and improve reliability on lines that we know people count on every day. Transit's been through a lot, especially with everything that's taking place with the disruptions and changes to commuting patterns during COVID. But what hasn't changed is how important it is to so many people's daily routines, commutes, and budgets. And the other thing I think is really important to think about when it comes to transit is even if you don't use it, you benefit from strong transit because it means less congestion on the roads.
Yeah. I do wonder, though, it does feel unsustainable moving forward. These one-time injections of funds, capital investment is great. But how do we get to a place of sustainability when these ridership systems, like I said, are seeing so many fewer passengers than they did just 5 years ago?
Well, the reason these investments matter is they can make the difference between a vicious cycle and a virtuous cycle. A vicious cycle happens when you have some kind of ridership. It hits the revenue of the system. They wind up having to respond, and then you have even less ridership. But a virtuous cycle can happen too. That's where you invest in the quality and the frequency of a transit system in a way that leads more people to use it and ride it, which in turn brings more revenue, which allows there to be better service and frequency. That's really what we're trying to drive here. The other thing I would say is that it is time to reimagine some of our assumptions around transit. Some of the older hub and spoke models that served us well in the 20th century are not necessary or sufficient for the 21st, an era of micro-mobility, scooters, Ubers and Lyfts and other things. It doesn't mean transit is less relevant. It's as relevant as ever. It means transit may not look the exact same. That's okay. And we are supporting and funding transit authorities that are leaning into that new reality.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I want to switch to airports and air safety. Hundreds of flights depart from Philadelphia International Airport every single day. The FAA has been understaffed, and we've heard about reports of near misses. What's the strategy for dealing with the issues within this very important agency?
Well, this week the president released his new budget, which requests funds to add air traffic controllers. We think that's vital to maintaining and enhancing our aviation safety record. Just think about what an extraordinary fact it is that flying on an airline in America is by far, the safest way to travel. It's an extraordinary thing to contemplate for a form of travel that involves being propelled at nearly the speed of sound through the sky by flammable liquids. And we don't take for granted for 1 second what it takes to keep that up. That means that industry has to do its part. It's why we're applying an extreme amount of scrutiny to Boeing right now after some of the manufacturing issues at flight. Airlines do their part with flight crews, pilots, and maintenance. And the government needs to do our part with an adequately resourced FAA. And it means making sure there is the equipment and technology that they need as well. The president's budget will help meet that goal. We're hoping that Congress can find some bipartisan reasons to support that, because it really shouldn't be a partisan issue. The American economy and the safety of the traveling public calls for us to make these investments.
You touched on it there, but what is your message to the American people about the safety of plane travel as we read these, dire headlines about quality control at Boeing, the 737 MAX? How do you convince people that it is safe to fly?
Well, again, flying on an American airliner is dramatically safer than any other form of transportation in the United States. So much so that where in the past we used to approach aviation safety by looking at the most recent fatal crash and learning from it, what we do now instead is look at the most recent close call in the absence of crashes and learn from those close calls. That's how we're continually raising the bar and making sure that we maintain the aviation safety record that we have in the U.S. But what we simultaneously need to do is take that same level of rigor, take that same level of focus, and bring it to roadway safety, where America loses about as many people as a full 737 every single day, and yet it gets very little attention. That's why we're making investments on things like Roosevelt Boulevard in Philadelphia, which is a high crash corridor, and other things across the roadway network. So whether we're talking about roadway safety, rail safety, or aviation safety, we're going to continue seeking to raise the bar and enlist every level of industry and every level of government to cooperate with us in getting that done.
Speaking of road safety, what is the number one thing we can do today in a city like Philadelphia to reduce traffic fatalities? If you could just pick one, would it be cameras? Would it be traffic calming? What do you see as the biggest mover in that space?
Well, we know that roadway design is a big part of it. That's why we're investing in Roosevelt Boulevard, Broad Street, and other areas where there has been a number of crashes. But the truth is there is no one single silver bullet. Our roadway safety strategy has 5 major areas: safer roads, safer speeds, safer vehicles, safer people, drivers and pedestrians and passengers too, and a higher standard of post-crash care. We really need to press on all of those simultaneously in order to get results. We're finally seeing indications that we have begun to reverse the rise in roadway deaths, about a 1% reduction last year, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not enough. But even that 1% reduction represents about 400 lives saved compared to the year before. We really need to pay much more attention to this as a country. I think we're so used to it that we've come to accept it, but these roadway deaths are preventable, and the only truly acceptable number of roadway deaths is 0.
Yeah. And Secretary, Pennsylvania, I'm going to pivot a little bit because Pennsylvania is critical to a Democratic win in November's presidential election. Polls have shown repeatedly a dead heat between President Biden and former President Trump. What, in your mind, is the strategy for convincing Pennsylvania voters to choose Biden for a second term?
Well, because I'm speaking as secretary, I can't say anything about campaigns or elections. But what I can say is that this is an administration that is proud of how we are delivering in communities across the country and certainly across Philadelphia and across Pennsylvania. We're talking about red, blue, and purple parts of the Commonwealth that have seen enormous benefits in what has happened with improvements to roads and bridges, airports, trains, transit, and more, and also a real focus on the affordability of everyday life. President Biden laid out a clear contrast between his vision and congressional Republicans when he was in the House delivering his State of the Union last week. I was there as he talked about a fairer tax code, talked about what it would mean if he gets his way and we make insulin $35 a month for every American, not just for seniors, what it means to make sure that we keep cutting junk fees like what credit cards and hotels and airlines are charging people, an economic agenda that most Americans already agree with, but that he's calling for Capitol Hill to support him in actually delivering.
Well, thank you so much for the time, Secretary, and we hope you enjoy your time in Philadelphia.
I always do. I'm really looking forward to today. Thanks very much.